It's your boy Godzilla Brawler here, and due to inclement weather, I have had to work remotely today and therefore have not had to drive multiple hours in a single day. So that means that I can at the very least record this video and thus will be able to edit it and work on it in the succeeding days. Yes, this is another Monday evening bonus video, and much like I said the last time I needed to broach this particular subject, I did not think I was going to have to do a video on this, and in total fairness, I don't have to do anything, including this video, but I feel like this is a video topic that is not going to be getting its own dedicated video on any other YouTube channels, so I think that someone has to do it, and if it's going to be anyone, it should be me. We are going back to the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee topic and discussion space today, particularly because I wish to relay unto you, the wonderful, beautiful viewer, my findings and kind of what I surmised after rereading many of the monster manuals in the monster manual for Godzilla Save the Earth Melee in regards to a topic that does not necessarily relate to the gameplay of the thing in question. Anyone who has followed this channel and is a really cool person knows that many of the earlier monster manual discussion videos, I don't know why I am holding up this figure of Godzilla 2014, many of those monster manuals I skimmed over or skipped past entirely the bio pages. Obviously, when you open the monster manual, you just see all these monster icons, but if you click on any of them, it loads up the bio for that monster, and the first page in every single monster bio is the lore slash the story of the character slash monster in question that you chose. But as I said, I did not pay super hardcore attention to many of these monster manuals, and it was only in the later manuals that I really started to hyper analyze some of the details held within the monster manuals. So the other night, since I did not have work, I took it upon myself to write up a Godzilla Save the Earth Melee rough timeline based on the details that I could find in the monster manual pages. For future reference, if you are watching this in the future, which by its very nature and my process of recording, editing, and releasing videos you are, this video is being recorded on January 7th, 2025 at approximately 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if anything has been modified or added to the monster manual for Godzilla Save the Earth Melee past that particular time, that should explain why those discrepancies exist in this video in comparison to the modern version of the monster manual. Before we really get into it and dig into the details, I will say, if you like this kind of content, I did do my own personal Unified Godzilla timeline, and I reviewed it in a previous video. I have been working behind the scenes on a revised version of that timeline, but that timeline is not tied down to a particular project and piece of media like this Godzilla Save the Earth Melee timeline ostensibly is. So let me stop screwing around and I will begin to review this timeline as I have been able to surmise. If there are any inaccuracies or discrepancies in this timeline compared to what the Nasty Soft development team intends to be the lore for the universe of the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee universe, this was all what I could kind of figure out based on the details that I have at present. So this is not a hard canon for Godzilla Save the Earth Melee. This is just what I know based on what I read. So 542 million years ago, the Destroya microscopic crab organisms were introduced into the marine environment that would in the modern day become Tokyo Bay. Then approximately 400 million years after that, the quote terrible inferno god end quote Vulcanus goes dormant beneath the Earth's surface. As you can see, I have the picture of Godzilla Unleashed Obsidious adorning this rudimentary timeline here. This relates to Obsidious later in this timeline. Much like with Destroya, who I mentioned just a minute ago, this timeline timeline will include those characters and when they kind of showed up in the more modern / contemporary time period of Godzilla Save the Earth Melee. But based on the details that are in the monster manual, this is an event that I felt needed to be cataloged within the timeline for the mod / project / universe of such things. Thousands of years ago, which I misspelled, ago, not a gal. King Ghidorah 1, so the unique entity that was first referred to as King Ghidorah, eradicates the civilization of the planet Venus in addition to some other undefined number of extraterrestrial civilizations. This is a carryover from the Showa timeline and how King Ghidorah was introduced in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster within the Showa series. 12,000 years ago, Mothra is born and so is Batra, with the latter in particular being born to punish some unnamed civilization for creating weather controlling technology. I do not exactly remember if that was part of the lore for Godzilla and Mothra, the Battle for Earth in the Heisei series, but regardless of if it is or if it isn't, I have a feeling that particular nugget of detail is meant to be a reference or a callback to some pre-existing Toho Company Limited born media. When Batra goes beyond his original mandate, Mothra engages him in combat and seals him away subsequently. That I do have a little bit more confidence in saying is probably pretty much just lifted straight from Battle for Earth. Hundreds of years ago, Gigan Showa is engineered for use in the Nebulan war efforts as a, quote, terrain devastator. As I said in the Gigan Monster Manual video that I did some time ago, I am not sure if that is a character detail that was added by Nastysoft, or if that was always present in the Showa era lore for Godzilla, but I think it is a neat detail nonetheless. And just to clarify, even though we haven't gotten to it yet, the parenthetical of Showa does not necessarily indicate that there is a second Gigan. The only way that I denote that there are multiple versions of a particular kaiju involved in the timeline is through use of the 1, 2, 3 Roman numerals after the name. Then in 1954, Godzilla 1, particularly the classic iteration of Godzilla, as you can explore and see in the monster manual, emerges, and much like in the original Gojira, Daisuke Serizawa deploys use of the oxygen destroyer to take both himself out as well as Godzilla 1, but simultaneously, and bleeding over some of the details of the Monsterverse, Godzilla Specimen A, which is obviously Godzilla Legendary as you can see in the monster manual, is faced with the detonation of the Castle Bravo nuclear weapons test, which obviously does not succeed in killing him. But yes, technically the original Japanese Godzilla, Godzilla 1, emerges and is killed in the same year that the Legendary / Monsterverse version of Godzilla emerges within the context of Godzilla Save the Earth Melee. Then we start to get into a little bit of the trouble of the lore presented and outlined in the monster manual. So this might get a little bit complicated. I promise that is not me doing that. I am not in charge of the lore for the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee universe and project. Ironically, considering I opened on the breaking news kind of gag, I'm just the messenger here. I'm just communicating what I saw in the monster manual to you, the humble viewer. So if you don't like it, don't get mad at me is all I'm saying. In 1955, the monster manual implies that that is when Godzilla 2 emerges, and this is communicated, I believe, through the Showa Godzilla monster manual. As I note in that little snippet of text right there, when combined with the details presented in the other monster manuals, particularly I believe in the manuals for some of the various versions of the Japanese Godzilla, it makes it really hard to understand which version of Godzilla is Godzilla 2. If you are not aware, in Godzilla Save the Earth Melee, as of the moment of of recording this video, they plan to include Godzilla Millennium, Godzilla Heisei, Godzilla Showa, and Godzilla Classic in addition to the legendary MonsterVerse version of Godzilla. But the manual never really clarifies which version of Godzilla is the main version out of the various Japanese iterations of the character. Now, it's pretty obvious that classic Godzilla is not the main Godzilla because it is pretty explicit in saying that classic Godzilla died as a result of the oxygen destroyer detonation. But whether Showa, Heisei, or Millennium Godzilla is the current version of Godzilla, I cannot say for sure based on what is outlined in the manual itself. And it continues to get even more confusing when you factor in some of the other monsters that will be playable in Godzilla Save the Earth Melee and how their lore kind of ties into things. Because it is noted that Anguirus 1 emerges and does battle with Godzilla 2, presumably preserving the events of Godzilla Raids Again entirely within the canon, but again, the other versions of Godzilla make this rather complex, and this Anguirus is not the present day Anguirus, so just hold on to that nugget, we'll get to it. In 1956, Rodan 1 and Rodan 2 appear at Mount Aso, but both of them are killed in the volcanic eruption, if I remember correctly. Basically, even though I have yet to watch it as of the time of recording this video, I believe this is just the plot of the original Rodan film, but there is an amendment slash addendum to that film's plot here, which is that a miner named Shigeru Kawamura claims to see a third Rodan roaming the caves of the mountain afterwards, and is obviously noted as being a juvenile. This Rodan comes back later in the timeline, so I'm just going to keep moving. In 1957, the original Mogera appears and is subsequently destroyed. Showa Mogera is not currently listed in the manual as planned to be playable, and I will note that again once we get to the Heisei Mogera and its place in the timeline, but that is when the manual denotes that version of Mogera as being destroyed. It is never named outright, so hypothetically they could add this version of Mogera to the game and give it a pseudonym that differentiates it, but I just denoted it as such here in that way because an entity that is roughly approximate to a Showa Mogera does appear and is destroyed in 1957 according to the monster manual. Then in 1965, Baragon 1 appears and it dies in battle with the Frankenstein creature, and I write there that the implication as far as I'm concerned is that Frankenstein Conquers the World, the movie from the Showa era, probably pretty much happens as it did in the film, but that is another case where I have yet to actually watch the movie. Also, a thought occurs right on the spot. I have in my Save the Earth Melee poll predictions and skins supplications video theorized about the inclusion of Frankenstein and the Gargantuas as well as a host of humans in the form of a humanoid fighter. So the fact that Frankenstein is mentioned within the monster manual's pages is intriguing. I wonder if that is a sort of hint towards Nasty Soft's intentions for creating, developing, and implementing a Frankenstein character. Then in 1973, the events of Godzilla vs. Megalon presumably occur as the film portrayed them, and this includes the first appearances of the Satopian Empire, Megalon, and Jet Jaguar. In 1975, the Simians unleash a second assault. Interesting that it is denoted specifically as the second assault on the Earth, and they employ use of Titanosaurus as well as Mechagodzilla Showa. Before I get off to the races here, I didn't write it in here, but use of the word second implies that the first Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla film from 1974 also takes place in this timeline, but I could not find any substantiation of that within the monster manual itself, mostly due to the absence of King Caesar and the Showa Mechagodzilla within the monster manual at present, but I highly anticipate that the Showa Mechagodzilla will eventually make make its way to the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee project, which I did discuss at length in my original ancient Godzilla Save the Earth Melee roster inclusion prediction suite. I will say though, even if they do not add Showa Mechagodzilla to the game, someone on YouTube made a pretty great hypothetical moveset list for the Showa Mechagodzilla. A particularly handsome fellow, even. And also, I note that the name Mechagodzilla parentheses Showa is just a presumptive name. If I were to guess, based on the naming schema and naming pattern of Super Mechagodzilla and Kiryu within this game already, Showa Mechagodzilla may end up just being called Mechagodzilla without any parentheticals included. But that's what I wrote it as here, just so it is crystal clear what I am referring to. Then in 1983, Baragon 2 appears in Ireland before being captured and brought to the Monster Island facility. As you can tell, at this stage, the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee timeline is pretty much just the official Toho Showa Godzilla timeline. We have yet to really delve into the hiccups caused by the unification of multiple Godzilla-related timelines and canons. And speak of the devil, in 1985, Godzilla 2 Heisei is denoted as emerging over 50 years after the original Godzilla died, due to a volcanic eruption at Daikoku Island. I am just going to take it on faith that that is part of the plot of Godzilla 1984, The Return of Godzilla, and Godzilla 1985, because I have not watched that movie in a while, nor have I watched any of its versions in a while. I wrote it here, and you can read the text on the screen to kind of read this in an alternative form from how I am talking right now. But the Heisei Godzilla manual kind of introduces a significant element of confusion with regards to the canon of the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee universe. The Atari Pipeworks Golden Trilogy of games, including Destroy All Monsters Melee, Save the Earth, and Unleashed, uses the Godzilla 2000 character as its focal version of Godzilla, and Godzilla Save the Earth Melee kind of repackages that version of Godzilla as Godzilla Millennium, so presumably that is the main version of Godzilla in this canon slash universe, because it is never explicitly stated that there are multiple main Godzillas roaming around in those games. Obviously, because Save the Earth Melee is introducing Godzilla Legendary, there definitely are at least two separate Godzilla entities roaming around the canon, but none of the manuals ever really fully clarify how many of the Japanese versions of Godzilla are roaming around at the same time. I just wanted to kind of lay that all out because I don't really speculate a whole lot about that within this timeline as I wrote it up. I tried to just collect all of the various lore story details in this document, but perhaps that is a discussion for the comment section. It is also worth noting that I have been excommunicated from the Nasty Soft Godzilla Save the Earth Melee Discord, so any details regarding this that are solely housed there, I am not privy to those details, so discussing this topic in the comment section will help me if nothing else. Anyway, moving on, in 1990, the events of Godzilla vs. Biollante, including the appearance of the titular monster, occur again, presumably very closely to the versions of the events that we were shown in the movie itself. Also, Super X is not explicitly noted as having been developed either in 1985 or in 1990, because Super X2 did show up in Godzilla vs. Biollante, but I guess you could probably say that somewhere in between these two years, the Super X got developed in some form, because if we lift the Heisei Godzilla movie plots and try to alter their details as little as we possibly can, that would have to happen in this kind of area. In 1992, King Ghidorah 2, so not King Ghidorah 1, the one that destroyed Venus, King Ghidorah 2 appears and is defeated by Godzilla, and then Mecha King Ghidorah is developed and deployed, again probably pretty much exactly like was shown in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in 1991. The major difference, of course, being that this King Ghidorah is merely defeated and not outright killed, because G-Force recovers Mecha King Ghidorah's body and repairs it to some extent and to some degree, so that Mecha King Ghidorah can be alive in the present day of this timeline. Then in 1993, Godzilla has a quote grand battle with Mothra 1, and if you're confused about the versions, I will talk about that in a second. Mothra dies shortly after this battle and leaves an egg behind containing Mothra 2, but that egg is noted as having yet to hatch. So let me discuss the multiple confusing details, or perhaps more accurately, the lack of details within this set of details. It is unclear whether this is the Showa, Millennium, or Heisei versions of Godzilla. Pay no mind to the fact that I said those out of order. All we know for sure is that Godzilla battles with Mothra, presumably very closely mimicking the events of Godzilla and Mothra, the battle for Earth. But as I note here in this timeline, Batra is never mentioned in any of the manuals as having fought with Godzilla in any form. So Batra exists within this canon in a sort of Schrodinger's Batra sort of state, where we don't know if Batra has ever met Godzilla before, and if so, did Batra get defeated by Godzilla but not killed, or did Batra get killed and brought back? And then there's the question of which version of Godzilla are we even dealing with in terms of the Japanese side of things. All we know for sure is that Batra exists within the canon of Godzilla Save the Earth Melee. Otherwise, your guess is as good as mine. Then Super Mecha Godzilla is developed, and it is noted as being the mecha that had gotten the closest, direct quote, to killing Godzilla, in contrast to any other mechanical unit that mankind had developed within the universe. Or hell, not just mecha, just any creature that had fought Godzilla up until that point. Once more, this is probably just a proxy of the conflict seen in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, with the only differentiation being that Super Mechagodzilla is defeated, but it is not destroyed in the course of those events. I guess I should note, Fire Rodan 1 appears, but the modern day present version of Fire Rodan is not Fire Rodan 1, so Fire Rodan 1 probably died / sacrificed itself in the same way as was shown in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, the actual film. As you can see, they carried over a lot of stuff, but due to the kind of short form summarizations present in the monster manual, it makes it rather hard to exactly know what happened in those events. Then in 1995, Space Godzilla initially appears, and the Mogera Heisei mech unit completes development, and based on what we have already discussed so far, presumably the events of Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla occur, but Space Godzilla and Mogera both survive in their own unique ways. An interesting thing though is that the Heisei Mogera, as I refer to it here, is noted as having been developed from the Mogera that appeared in 1957, which we already went over. In the monster manual, Mogera is simply titled and referred to as Mogera, and the Mogera Showa character / entity is not currently slated for development nor inclusion in Godzilla Save the Earth Melee, but I used the parenthetical Heisei to make it clear what I am referring to there. It is also worth noting that Mogera is noted as having been developed within this canon because Mecha King Ghidorah and Super Mechagodzilla, quote, wouldn't be enough to keep the growing number of monsters at bay. And if you thought that I was very confused by the multiple Japanese Godzillas present in the monster manual, the Kiryu monster manual on its own does a tremendous amount of legwork to really make this confusing, and honestly, I think Kiryu may be a major plot hole within the logical flow of events and monster attacks in this canon, but I will talk about that more when we actually get to Kiryu and when Kiryu first appears. Now, this next thing is a completely original creation for the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee canon. In 1997, Jet Jaguar, the same Jet Jaguar that appeared and was present in the events of 1973, is, quote, captured by G-Force after having been spotted sporadically over the years. And many of the original abilities present in the Jet Jaguar character within the Atari Pipeworks Golden Trilogy are noted as having been given to Jet Jaguar through G-Force upgrades. And I will say I really like the fact that Jet Jaguar kind of just inexplicably disappears and then inexplicably reappears, but again, with the Kiryu details of the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee continuity, I'm not particularly certain what this says, because to me, Jet Jaguar would probably deal with other giant monster occurrences. The point is, I don't know. Anyway, after that, Zilla 2 emerges in New York City and bonds with Nick Tatopoulos, which leads to the formation of the Heat scientific research team that ends up following Zilla 2 around. You'll note that I do not mention Zilla 1 in this timeline, and that is not to say that Zilla 1 never existed, because obviously Zilla 2 has to succeed Zilla. But again, the Monster Manual does not directly make reference to that. It very much seems like Godzilla the series was lifted wholesale in terms of canonicity, especially because Homodothrax is an alternative skin for Zilla within the game itself. Like I said, I'm just reporting the details to you as I dredged them from the Monster Manual itself. Then we get the occurrence of a very confusing and confounding airlift from the Showa Godzilla continuity. King Ghidorah returns, but not King Ghidorah 2, which at this point in the timeline is Mecha King Ghidorah. No, the original King Ghidorah 1 from what is in our universe the Showa continuity comes to Earth under the control of the Keylocks, which I believe are only mentioned in one of the monster manuals. But as I mentioned here in the writing that you can read at your own speed on the screen, due to the confusion of which version of Godzilla is the main version, I don't know whether Destroy All Monsters occurred with the Showa, Heisei, or Millennium version of Godzilla. The Showa continuity and the Heisei continuity are in large part lifted and transposed onto the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee timeline, so it really just makes things hard to follow. I don't exactly know what is and is not true about the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee timeline. In the same year, 1999, it is also noted in one of the manuals, I cannot remember off the top of my head which one, that the Zillion race, quote, vanishes. I must admit, and you can read what I wrote there, but I do not know in specific what this detail about the continuity and the canon is in reference to. It cannot be in reference to anything that was in the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy of movies, as was true in real life as we are currently living it. The only thing that I can really guess is that this has to do with the Godzilla Island television series. If you can't tell, my multiple sclerosis kind of turns me into Sylvester from Looney Tunes if I talk for too long. Suffering footage. But I know that the Exilians were involved in the plot slash the story for the Godzilla Island show. We know that there are various skins made to reference the Godzilla Island show within Godzilla Save the Earth Melee, and Godzilla Island finished airing sometime in 1998 in Japan, so that is the only guess that I can make. Obviously, I do not have access to internal Nazi soft documentation surrounding the timeline, so I don't know. Then in 2014, Godzilla Legendary re-emerges, just like was the case in the movie itself and in the MonsterVerse as is currently going on. It is interesting to note, no further detail regarding the events seen in the MonsterVerse are conveyed through the Monster Manual. So even though we have skins and alternate alternate forms from MonsterVerse movies that came out after Godzilla 2014. The manual itself does not confirm the temporal and chronological dispositions of any of those events, or whether those events have technically even transpired within Save the Earth Melee's continuity. Okay, so 2021 is the beginning of pretty much everything that is specific to the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee continuity, as I can understand it, based on the Monster Manual. Destroya is specifically noted as having emerged from hibernation in the year 2021, specifically due to the deployment and activation of the Organizer G1 devices, which, if I am not mistaken, are 100% original to this continuity. So there will be more detail about them as we continue through this section. So at some point in the past, Godzilla 2 emerged, but this is the version of that relayed through the Millennium Godzilla Monster Manual. We do not know precisely when Godzilla 2 emerged, according to the Millennium Godzilla Manual. And this makes sense, given that this timeline has in large part been a transposition of official Toho material, and there was no one individual canon continuity timeline for the Millennium films. But as I previously stated, the Atari Pipeworks Golden Trilogy seemed to go with Godzilla 2000 as its quote-unquote main Godzilla. So again, this just kind of complicates the quagmire of the Japanese Godzilla iteration question within this universe. It is entirely possible that Godzilla 2000 is canon in some form or fashion due to the use of the phrase and term Organizer G1. For anyone who does not remember, Organizer G1 was a crucial component of the plot for Godzilla 2000. So we could just assume that the events of that film happened, but due to some of the details that are relayed to us through another one of the monster manuals, it's a little bit hazy, and if you are scratching your head at this point, I promise you so was I last night when I went over all this stuff. Did I say last night? Moving on. At some point in the undefined past, Anguirus 2 is noted as having emerged. In order for the events of Godzilla Save the Earth and Godzilla Unleashed to take place, as well as for the events of Destroy All Monsters, which takes place in 1999 in this canon, and the events of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, which takes place in 1974, presumably, in this continuity, even though we don't know for sure. In order for those events to take place, there needs to be a second Anguirus apart from the original that would essentially be the proxy for the Godzilla Raids Again version of Anguirus. This needs to happen, but the exact date is, as I have said before, undefined. We do not know. It is never said when, but at some point, Megaguirus comes into existence, but the Dimension Tide is not noted in any way in any of the monster manuals. Instead, Megaguirus comes into being as a result of feeding on some of Godzilla's blood at some undefined point. And again, without specific reference to any particular Japanese iteration of Godzilla. I mean, technically, I guess, for all we know, it could have fed on Godzilla Legendary. That's probably not the case, but the manual does not clarify, so who is really to say? The Kiryu Monster Manual notes that Kiryu was never completed, quote, due to the lack of monster attacks for decades at a time. But as anyone who has stuck around to this point in the video knows, based on the details presented to us in other monster manuals outside of Kiryu, this clearly cannot be the case. The only way this can be the case is if Godzilla Save the Earth Melee is working with a sort of multiversal Spider-Verse kind of fractured continuity setup. I do note here that this is the kind of problem you run into when you overtly fuse together multiple incongruous media timelines without altering any of the events of any of those given timelines for use in your timeline. I mentioned earlier that I reviewed that old Godzilla timeline of mine in a previous video, and the truth is that I have tried to develop a more modern combined undefined timeline, but with the existence of the MonsterVerse and all the various Japanese Godzilla media that has been released since I originally wrote that timeline back in my youth, the only way to fit stuff in a logical way is to alter things. And I believe the Kiryu Monster Manual is the epicenter for that kind of problem in the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee continuity as it currently stands. Anyway, moving on. At some point, Space Godzilla appears but is subsequently imprisoned. Now, this is just a guess by me, but I would imagine this is inferring / implying that at least Godzilla Save the Earth and Godzilla Unleashed happened in some form within this continuity. I don't know if I note this later, but Godzilla Save the Earth and Godzilla Unleashed had rather hazy plot lines and event series to begin with, so I'm not really surprised that Save the Earth Melee kind of took this route with Space Godzilla in the present day, but it is worth noting regardless. Gigan is defeated in a near-fatal battle with Jet Jaguar at some point, and I may be completely off base, but I think this might be in reference to a trailer for Godzilla Save the Earth Melee itself. But Gigan is noted as having been retrieved and reconstructed by the Vortok aliens specifically as a result of Gigan's near death. In the course of reconstructing Gigan into the Final Wars / Millennium iteration, Gigan's teleportation is noted as now being tied to the teleportation system within the Vortok mothership. I am kind of confused though. I did not think about this until now, but if any of the events of Godzilla Unleashed are canon to the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee continuity, it must be the case that either the Vortok mothership is not downed during the events of Godzilla Unleashed, or it was down during the course of the events of Godzilla Unleashed and the Vortok have reconstructed / gotten a new mothership for their species. Gigan was previously under the control of the Nebula M Space Hunter alien race, but obviously after being rebuilt, Gigan is directly under the control of, or rather, is itself directly under the control of the Vortok aliens. Okay, time to get back to the headaches of the day. Kiryu is noted as having been completed, quote, when the Vortok War began, and was, quote, the third mecha that G-Force began construction on years ago. Now, even if we assume the Heisei events happened as they have been communicated through the manuals, Kiryu being the third mecha is not incongruous with anything because Super Mecha Godzilla would have been the first, and then Mogera would have been the second. So Kiryu being the third one is not particularly crazy. Some of the other details of Kiryu's existence within this continuity are incongruous, but we already went over those. Kiryu is noted as having been developed to be the JSDF's answer to the Millennium iteration of Godzilla, and if we step back out for a second and just talk about the game in a meta context, Goji Rex has said that Kiryu is meant to kind of be a counterpart to Godzilla Millennium within the gameplay of Godzilla Save the Earth Melee, so understand this being written into the monster manual for that reason, but I'm not going to go over it again. The Japanese incarnation of Godzilla within the canon of Godzilla Save the Earth Melee is spaghetti continuity at this point, based on what I have relayed to you, the viewer. Within the Zilla monster manual, Heat is noted as having disbanded at some point in the narrative / continuity past, and they are also noted as having disbanded many years ago. When exactly that occurred is never specified, but that happened at some point in the past. Okay, we have finally gotten to the present day. The Vortok Council is formed in the present day based on what the monster manual tells us. The Vortok Council is entirely original to this continuity, and even though I have not written it in here because it is not a timeline detail, a number of the extraterrestrial species of the Godzilla franchise across all the different eras are noted as being on this council. At the very least, we know the Nebulans are involved, but we also know for a fact that the Zillions and the Keloks and what I would term as the Simians exist in this universe. Actually, now that I think about it, I think the simians are named in the Titanosaurus manual. The exact composition of the Vortok Council, in long and in short, I am not particularly certain in regards to. All we know for sure, as I note here, is that the Vortok Council begins placing Organizer G1 generators around the planet Earth. I don't think there is a specific motive or reason given, nor is there a specific date outlined for when this starts, but that is a major detail of this continuity. Part of the reason I am very uncertain as to whether Godzilla 2000 actually occurs within this timeline is that placement of the Organizer G1 generators disturbs the hibernation of the Millennium ship that was seen in Godzilla 2000, and several specimens of the Millennium species interact with Organizer G1 and subsequently combine into the Orga monster slash character within the game. You know, I was thinking of something to continue after saying all that, but I'm starting to lose my train of thought. Some point, Godzilla 2, version unknown, is captured by Vortok forces and Godzilla 2 subsequently escapes capture. My theory is that this is a reference to the action mode slash the story mode of Godzilla Save the Earth, but again, in truth, I do not know. At some point, Fire Rodan 2 makes an appearance. This is, in my guesstimation, the Atari Pipeworks Golden Trilogy version of Rodan, but there is not really a whole lot of detail regarding Fire Rodan in the manual, so I think that's the last time I even mention it in here. Now, this next one is very interesting. The, quote, embodiment of rage, known as Angulus, noted as being monochromatic, emerges at some point in the present day. And Angulus is the version of Anguirus that appeared in Godzilla Raids Again, but within this continuity, Angulus is a separate entity, and it is noted that the Shobijin warn about the danger presented by Angulus's appearance, and that G-Force does not subscribe to any particularly superstitious explanation regarding it. But yeah, Angulus is different from Anguirus 1 and Anguirus 2. It resembles Anguirus 1, but that's it. Rodan 3 reappears at some point and is spotted here and there by the Earth population, but again, the manual is pretty vague on that point. Then, at some point in the present, whenever that is, Biolante's spores return from space. So we know that in the actual Godzilla vs. Biolante's spores were jettisoned into outer space / into Earth orbit at the end of Godzilla vs. Biolante, but here Biolante returns to the Earth, but due to the unclear nature of the details of the monster manual, we do not know exactly when Biolante returned, only that she returned at all. Then, at some point, due to the placement and activation of the Organizer G1 devices by the Vortok Council, Obsidius emerges. But again, it is unclear whether this is Obsidius 1 or Obsidius 2 within this canon. And this is especially exacerbated by the fact that we do not know to what extent Godzilla Unleashed and its events translate into this universe, because, well, I mean, Godzilla Unleashed has a very hazy canon just due to the nature of the player having to make their own way through the story mode of Godzilla Unleashed on the Wii. We know for sure, based on the manual, that the Grand Vulcanus went into hibernation some time ago, but the actual Obsidius entity, we don't know for sure whether this is Obsidius 1 or 2. If it's Obsidius 1, then this is the first avatar that Vulcanus has ever generated, and no other creature has been dubbed Obsidius by the inhabitants of this continuity's Earth up until this point. But it is equally possible that Obsidius 1 was the Obsidius that was created through the crystal incursion created by Space Godzilla attempting to escape its interdimensional prison, and this is Obsidius 2, which is totally unrelated in terms of origin and power set and what have you, and is only an avatar of Vulcanus, but for some reason or another, the inhabitants of the world with within this continuity just reused the Obsidious title. I don't know. Either one could work. I just wanted to bring that up. This is where having a comment section will be very important because I do not understand a lot of aspects of the continuity and canon of Godzilla Save the Earth Melee. Then, I believe this is the last note that I have in this document. The Heat team is reformed under the auspices of the G-Force organization. And yeah, that about covers it for all of that. That was incredibly tiring to go through. It took me like an hour and a half to do all of that based on what OBS Studio is telling me. I have to admit my own fault in the following matter. I did not give the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee project the credence that it deserved in terms of the depth of potential discussion that one can find within the lore elements of the project and nothing else. All of those old Godzilla Save the Earth Melee Monster Manual videos that I have done and you definitely need to check out were mostly about the gameplay of the game slash the mod of Godzilla Save the Earth Melee. I didn't really pay a whole lot of heed to the lore for the project at the very beginning. But as this video hopefully has shown, there's kind of a lot to theorize in this project. And I wanted to devote some of the spare time that I have to kind of theorizing and documenting the canon of the project itself, the lore, the universe. So there are a lot of questions that are unanswered for me regarding the canon of Godzilla Save the Earth Melee. So if you have any theories, please drop them in the comment section. As I have said earlier on in the video, every once in a while I have been working on a kind of revised, unified timeline for my own gratification, and partially because there was a dude that left a comment under that original personal timeline video that I kind of want to make proud by releasing another timeline related video. So the more we can kind of figure out the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee timeline, the more I'll be able to figure out that timeline. So not only would it be in the best interests of exposure to the Godzilla Save the Earth Melee project to promote discussion of this topic, my own personal timeline would probably benefit greatly from any discussion that takes place as a result of asking these questions. Anyways, that about does it for me, guys. It is not snowing outside. I just like this pretty little graphic. So if I use it at any point in the future, just know that that is why. Also, I did make a graphic for breaking news featuring Kanimatsu in her Glacier A, Glacier B outfit for future use in any of my videos, and hopefully at some point I will download and use a rain GIF to kind of simulate that as a graphical effect. I like having fun with my YouTube videos and recording them and editing them and all of that jazz, so drop a subscription down below if you are at all interested in seeing my content develop and continue. But if you would really like to help see my content continue, please consider checking out my merchandise store, Mount Merch. I have lots of different t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies, and coffee mugs, and other forms of drinkware up for sale on Mount Merch. And due to some of the major life changes that I am going through as of the time of recording this video, and thus have probably gotten to the other side of by the time this video comes out, your financial support to me would be greatly appreciated. But be not alarmed, I am not begging for your money, but I will say the profit margins on all of the merchandise up on Mount Merch is pretty slim, so just putting it out there. I did not price things based on making a living off of the venture on its own. Anyways, you guys take it easy, and I will see you guys in the next video.
Why would you do that?